Today we're going to learn about a formula that's going to help us solve quadratic equations for pretty much any quadratic equation that you get. Now, this formula is called the quadratic formula specifically for that reason, but what we're going to want to do is not necessarily use it for every example of a quadratic equation. We were definitely going to want to test for factoring and square roots before we move into completing the square or the quadratic formula. But if you take the generic standard form of an equation and you did the completing the square process for it, what you would realize is that you get this formula for x by moving it and solving for x. When you do this, you come up with the quadratic formula that allows us to solve for any quadratic formula, any quadratic equation that you run into. Now, you just need to know what the a, the b, and the c are, and it has to be equal to 0. So it's got to be in standard form for this to work. Now, this is extremely important that you understand that this can actually help you solve any quadratic equation that you're working on. Now, if we look at it from an application standpoint, the very first thing that you have to do is you have to rewrite the equation in standard form equaling to 0. Now, at this point, if we were looking at an example, like example number 1, it would be important to go through our other ways of solving. And so if you look at this, we've changed it to 2x squared plus x minus 5 equals to 0. So at that point, you would think, can I use factoring? And in this case, you may be able to use the grouping process, but what you'll eventually realize is that it will not break up perfectly for you. Then you might think to yourself, can I use square roots? And if you notice, we have a b value, and so we will not be able to use square roots. Completing the square would actually be an appropriate technique, but if you recall from earlier lessons and activities that when we had a completing the square with a leading coefficient greater than 1, this created some pretty ugly fractions that were difficult to manage and work through. So we're going to come to our final way here, which is the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula basically presets the answer for you to where all you need to do at this point is identify the a, b, and c, and then go through the order of operations necessary to condense the quadratic formula. And you can see in this example that we have two different ways of answering this question. So this would be the exact value, and of course sometimes we'll be asking you for the answer in the exact value, but just in case, you could also see that we have a rounded value for our answers here. So depending on which way the answer is being asked, you need to give the answer in the appropriate form. So that's a quick overview of the quadratic formula and how it would work in a quadratic equation. It would be necessary for you to, first of all, eliminate other methods of solving quadratic equations before you went to the quadratic formula. But this is a way to work any quadratic. So in the next video, we will look at some actual examples of working quadratics.